Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
King inspired with words not of anger, but of an urgency that still speaks to us today. He said, unity is the great need of the hour. Unity is the great need of the hour. In South Carolina, unity is the great need of this hour. Not because it sounds nice or because it makes us feel good, but because it's the only way we can overcome the essential deficit that exists in this country. Now, I'm not talking about the budget deficit. I'm not talking about the trade deficit. I'm not talking about the deficit of good ideas or new plans. I'm talking about the moral deficit in America. I'm talking about an empathy deficit that exists. I'm talking about an inability to recognize ourselves in each other, to understand that we are our brother's keeper, that we are our sister's keeper, that in the words of Dr. King, we are all tied together in a single garment of destiny. We have an empathy deficit when we're still sending our children down corridors of shame instead of corridors of opportunity, not just in South Carolina, but all across the United States of America. We have a deficit when CEOs are making more in 10 minutes than ordinary workers are making an entire year, when families lose their homes so that lenders can make a profit, when mothers can't afford a doctor, when their children get sick, when we've got trade agreements that are very good for Wall Street, but not so good for Main Street. We've got a deficit in this country. We have a deficit in this country when there's Scooter Libby justice for some and Gina justice for others. When our children are still seeing nooses hanging from a schoolyard tree. We have a deficit when homeless veterans sleep on the streets of our cities and young Americans serve tour after tour of duty in a war that I believe should have never been authorized and should have never been waged. And we have a deficit when it takes a breach of our levees to reveal the breach in our compassion, when it takes a terrible storm to reveal the hungry that God calls on us to feed, the sick that he calls on us to care for, the least of these that he commands us to treat as our own. So, South Carolina, we've got a deficit to close, not just in this state, but in my home state of Illinois, all across America. We have barriers of justice and equality that must come down. And to do this, we know that unity is the great need of the hour. We can't do this alone. We can't do it separately, but here's the thing. True unity cannot be purchased on the cheap. It starts with changing attitudes, by broadening our hearts and broadening our minds. And that's not always easy. It's not always easy standing in somebody else's shoes. It's not always easy to see past our differences. And what makes it even more difficult is our politics sometimes drives us apart. We don't need a politics of fear in this country. We need a politics of hope. That's what Dr. King's message talks about. Because if Dr. King could love his jailer, if he could call on Americans to forgive those who set dogs and fire hoses upon them, then surely we can look past what divides us in our time and bind up our wounds and erase that empathy deficit in our heart. See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.